Hello interwebs and welcome to my channel. So for this video, I just wanted to have a quick interesting discussion because it's been coming up with my discussion with my friends, especially my roommate, about how we criticize works of TV and movies today and how it's become so incredibly polarized in many different senses. And I've already done a video about this, about when it comes to toxic fandoms and how toxic fandoms use criticism to pursue certain agendas and also push making money and things like that. But I want to kind of bring it back from that sort of like larger discussion about culture and YouTube problems with YouTube and things like that to just talk about, like, when we have discussions critiquing a work, why it becomes so fraught for a lot of us, why it becomes so meaningful for a lot of us, and why it's hard for us to kind of critique something and also love something. And before we get started, just something I want to quick mention. I did a video earlier on it this week, so if you want more details on this, please check out that video. But recently I was scammed out of a lot of money, and the only reason I bring it up is I also have a surgery coming up that I am paying for. And so while I normally would not ask for help with scamming problems, I am asking for help with my upcoming surgery. It's going to be a rough time financially for me, especially now. So any help that you can give financially I cannot tell you how much it would mean to me. GoFundMe is probably the best place because any money that goes to my GoFundMe goes directly towards my surgery. So if you can give there, it would truly mean the world to me. And like I said, I did a video going into sort of my very complicated and hard feelings on that topic. So if you want to see more about that and learn more about that, check out that video below. And if you can help me out, it would mean a lot. But regardless, let's keep going with the rest of this video and have some fun. Something on this channel that I've discussed heavily numerous times is that I am a huge fan, obviously, of Star Trek. I mean, look at my wall behind me, look at this channel. I discuss Star Trek pretty much all the time, and there is a car alarm going off outside my building, so apologies if that comes up. So clearly I love Star Trek quite a bit, but I always try to make sure on this channel when I discuss Star Trek in every iteration of Star Trek that it is imperfect. From the original series all the way to Star Trek Picard. I mean, literally my last video was on how I had a lot of praise, but also a lot of issues with how Seven of Nine was portrayed as bisexual on Star Trek Picard. And something like the original series, while it was certainly very progressive, it certainly pushed a lot of like really important social and political issues of the time, it also had a lot of problems when it came to representing women. It definitely had a lot of episodes that were focused on women being sexy, or women essentially, like Uhura, as important as she was, being basically the glorified receptionist on the Enterprise. It is saying in all things, in every TV show and movie, especially in Star Trek, nothing is perfect. Everything is going to have problems. It could be something that's really meaningful and does a lot of good things, but also will make mistakes. And I say that, saying that about Discovery, as someone who loves Star Trek Discovery makes mistakes, both in its writing and sometimes its representation of political and social issues, in sort of larger storytelling issues. It's not going to be a perfect show in any way, shape, or form. Same with Star Trek Picard. I love Star Trek Picard. I don't think it's perfect. I have problems with some of the ways its story has felt drawn out, how some of its characters are being portrayed, things like that. And I'm not just talking about like social political issues like, yeah, they portrayed a queer character this way, or, you know, they portrayed a character of color this way. I have problems with like the actual story itself. But the problem that we come into today when it comes to talking about TV shows and movies and anything that we love is that it feels like to critique something feels like we're giving ground to the other side. Like, for example, here, for Star Trek Picard currently on the air, there are a lot of people that really dislike Star Trek Picard. And for me, that's okay. It is 100% okay to dislike Star Trek Picard. But for me, as someone who loves Star Trek Picard, and I know for a lot of people, sometimes it feels like when people hate on something or like say something bad about the show that you like, there's something being personally attacked about you. And the same goes for other people. Like if we critique, you know, people who hate Star Trek Picard, it feels like we're attacking them for like, you don't get Star Trek Picard, you don't like it. Or, you know, people who's like, you don't get Star Trek because you like Star Trek Picard, you're stupid for liking this show. And it kind of eliminates any ability to have a nuanced conversation about it. Like, for example, on this channel, I always try to talk positively about a show, and I also show my critiques about Star Trek Picard. But I've also learned that when I start off a video, if I start off a video reviewing something and say something that I find problematic or I'm critiquing about Star Trek Picard, that's the thing that people are going to latch onto in my comments and say like, oh, you're a toxic Star Trek YouTuber. Even though, anyone who watches my channel for a regular amount knows that I'm not trying to hate on Star Trek Picard. I love Star Trek Picard. But it sort of instantly becomes, if I say something critical about it, it's going to immediately be blown up into like, oh, I'm hateful of it. Because, again, everything's been so polarized. And like I said, that's not going to change how I feel about something. I legitimately love Star Trek Picard. I have many reasons to love it, and I'll also always make sure to share my criticisms. So don't ever worry about that. I'm not going to cater my voice necessarily to those comments. But it's just something that I've noticed over time. I think we need to make sure that we're enabling spaces, and I've said this in numerous videos, but I just always like to remind people of it, of just make sure we're enabling spaces to have critical response. Now, like I said, there are certain things and certain responses to shows that I do not accept in terms of mostly how you treat and frame others who have differing opinions than you. If you hate Star Trek Picard, that is okay, and I would love to have you on this channel. I want to have your discussion. I want to discuss with you. I've talked with numerous of my friends who really dislike Star Trek Picard and have problems with it, and I love discussing why they have issues with it. The only thing I really hate is when you come in and say, oh, only true Star Trek fans really understand Star Trek, and if you like Star Trek Picard, you're not really a true fan. Only true fans love the Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Next Generation. Discovery and Picard fans aren't really Star Trek fans. You're either you're just someone new to Star Trek, you don't really get it, or things like that. Just basically gatekeeping Star Trek, and there's numerous forms that can take. Basically saying, you've only been a Star Trek fan for a little while. Or, as someone who loves Discovery, I've been a Star Trek fan my entire life, well before Discovery. So you're never going to get me on that sort of well, you're a new fan, you don't get real Trek. I've been a Trek fan for a long time. But there are people who join Star Trek just for Discovery. And that's cool too. They get Star Trek because they like Star Trek. I always hate gatekeeping on that level. I also should say it goes the other way too. That people who say if you don't like Star Trek Picard, you're dumb and an idiot and you don't get current TV. But and maybe it's just my bias towards seeing those groups, but I do tend to find that gatekeeping does come out of a lot of hatred towards New Trek and less from the people who like New Trek. Maybe I'm biased, maybe I'm blinded in certain respects on that front, but I do tend to see it that way. Generally, if I take the time to say someone who says, I hate Discovery or I hate Picard, and I say, why? And we actually have a wonderful discussion about it. Maybe I change their mind a little bit. Maybe they change my mind a little bit. And I learn a little bit more about oh, yeah, well, that is a problem with Discovery. But it doesn't make me like the show less. It just makes me aware of some problems that maybe I wasn't aware of. Again, art is always imperfect. No show is going to be perfect. Even the best shows. For example, I think one of the best shows this year was Watchmen. And even Watchmen had problems here and there. So even the best written movies or TV shows are not going to be perfect, and they're not going to be for everybody. That's just how art goes. The movies that are for everybody, like big blockbuster movies, even people hate those, but the movies that are for everybody generally are the most blandest movies out there. And maybe the Star Trek that you liked isn't being made anymore. And that's sad, and I'm sorry. And, there are shows like The Orville for you, which I also love The Orville as well. And maybe that scratches your itch in terms of what you like for Star Trek. That's all cool. Just don't gatekeep people and understand that we can have a critique of something. And I've been phrasing this towards people who hate Discovery and Picard for the most part, but I also think we should be critical of the shows. Again, I don't think Picard or Discovery are perfect shows. I love Discovery quite a bit. Especially for me, I love the characters on Discovery, but I think some of the plot in season 2 of Discovery and in season 1 fell apart. That didn't really work. Doesn't make sense. For example, the 9 red orbs, or the 9 red bursts. Why did they show up first when we learn at the end of the seasons, minus spoilers, that Burnham only went to the time that she made them to set off the red bursts? So why did they all appear at once at the beginning of the season? That seems a bit of a weird thing. And even if we retcon, Burnham also went and set off the red bursts at that time and then went to each place to do the red burst things, why wouldn't the Discovery have known where those red bursts were? I mean, clearly they all happened at once, so they could have just scanned and be all right, these are where they appeared. Let's just go to all those places instead of waiting for them to show up again to learn where they were. It makes no sense whatsoever, and it kind of is confusing very much retroactively. That's a problem with Star Trek Discovery. It's very clearly a problem. It doesn't ruin my enjoyment of the show because I think on an episode-by-episode basis, I really enjoyed the stories being told. I really enjoyed the character arcs that story was used to facilitate and the things that those characters went through. But if you really look at it overall, there's a lot of plot problems. And that just is how it is. And that's okay for me to say because I also love the show. And the fact that there is that problem doesn't ruin it for me. I mean, it makes, something that I hope they can improve upon, certainly in future seasons, but the show still speaks to me as a fan of the show. And that's cool. You can hate something and still like aspects of it, and you can like something and dislike aspects of it. That's how criticism works. And I think the only time we need to condemn a work overall is when it is harmful to a person or community. If a movie comes out that's portraying stereotypes of people in a very harmful way, like if you're doing something like blackface or yellowface or making fun of queer people or insulting queer people or belittling queer people, I think that's where we need to really be harsh and condemn a work, because portraying stereotypes of groups of people in really harmful ways, as much as we'd like to think like it's just art, it doesn't really have an effect. Art does have an effect, especially broad mass art. When people go out and see something and how a certain group is portrayed, it affects how that group is seen in real life. Like when you insult trans people or belittle trans people in a work of fiction, people tend to think that's how all trans people are. And I say that personally, having experienced that. People think that like I'm supposed to be a certain way because of how, a trans person was depicted in a certain movie. People have literally brought that up to me. So I think that's when we should really condemn a work, when it is harmful to a person, group, or people. But otherwise, I think it's totally fine to critique or look at a work and love parts of it, hate parts of it, and understand that both of those things can coexist in a work of art. And even, for example, there are problems within like Picard or Discovery or even old Star Trek shows that I think were, to a degree, harmful, unintentionally harmful. Like towards in the original series, there were how women portrayed was a bit sexist at times. I think that's important to acknowledge that show was at times sexist towards women. It also portrayed women really well in many ways, but also was sexist towards women in others, like in the episode Mud's Women. And I think it's totally okay to acknowledge that and say that it was harmful, but still like the work. I think you can talk about how something was harmful and critique it and hope that the show gets better, and not blanket condemn the work, but condemn aspects of it. So, I mean, even in condemning a work, there are degrees and ways that we can be like, we condemn this part, but still love it overall. And I think that's really just an important part of critique and criticism, to understand that works of art are not perfect, and works of art are not going to be wholly good or wholly bad. They will be always somewhere in between. And it's just about figuring out the amount and what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and how it speaks to you and doesn't speak to you. So yeah, I think that's just important discussion. So hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I just said down in the comments below. Also, if you want more discussions like this, consider giving my channel a subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. And also, as I said at the top of this video, this week has been kind of rough for me personally. I've been scammed out of a lot of money, and I also have a surgery coming up. So if you are able to, it would really mean a lot to me to have you financially support me in any way, shape, or form, either at my GoFundMe for my surgery, or my Patreon, or my PayPal account. Any of those ways are open for you if you want to really help me recoup some of my losses from the scam, and also with my upcoming surgery that I have coming up. If you give to my GoFundMe, that's the most direct way to help me recoup those losses and directly give to my surgery. But regardless of if you give to my Patreon or GoFundMe or anything like that, or whether you subscribe, I'm just glad that you stopped by and enjoyed this discussion. I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.